Hello, today we're going to look at the bleeding phase of the menstrual cycle. So now I'm going to look at what's actually happening in the days when we're bleeding. So the first day of the menstrual cycle is clearing out of the womb. So it's the end of the cycle for the womb, but it's the beginning of a new cycle for the eggs, because this drop of progesterone and estrogen causes a rise in follicle stimulating hormone, and that gives the name to this phase. Day one, follicle stimulating hormone starts to increase, and this sets off the beginning stages of maturation of the new eggs that are going to mature during this cycle. About 5 to 15 of them, it depends. Only one will fully mature, and I'll talk much more about the eggs journey in my video on ovulation. But I think it's worth remembering that this is the beginning, a new cycle for the eggs. So how do women experience the actual, or how do you experience the actual bleeding? Again, that's very different, because some women carry on as normal, they don't feel that tired. I talked about how women have different responses in the week before. Some women feel as soon as they get their blood loss, they get energized by it and they don't feel so tired, whereas women that are very tired all the way through the cycle may just feel more tired because we're losing blood, and other women may have painful contractions, so the actual pain of the bleeding is what a lot of women may experience. And as I alluded at the beginning, it very much depends on our relationship to our blood, which is a lot informed by our culture's relationship. So in some cultures, blood is seen as sacred, and women would have time out and they would gather together and they'd support each other, and it would be quite a powerful time, because in this bleeding, as I said at the beginning of the video, we're clearing out, and it's a chance to transform our energies. We let go of what we no longer need. So part of the letting go of what we no longer need is clearing out the lining, but we're letting go of emotions perhaps we no longer need, or anything we no longer need. It's the biggest opportunity in the month when we can just let go. So often women find that they're quite clear about where they need to go in their life, about what is no longer helpful for them. Could be relationships they need to let go of, or things that in their life that are stressing them. It's an opportunity to re-evaluate. But in this letting go, we're letting out, and we can become quite open and vulnerable and emotionally sensitive. And this is a time when some women do feel very sensitive, and it's quite hard for them to engage with the outer world, which is why in traditional societies, when women took a bit of time for themselves and were supported by other women, they could go more into the sacred spaces of opening up and seeing a bigger picture, of letting go of things in their day-to-day life and coming into a different kind of space and way of being. And that's very much what the modern red tent movement encourages, is women to listen to themselves and see what's important during the menstrual phase, during the bleeding phase of the menstrual cycle, to get support from other women. And that, I think, is a really positive development for women, to seek support from other women if that's what's helpful for them. Whereas in other cultures, menstrual blood was seen as dirty, and it was a sign of women's uncleanliness. And if women have been brought up with that attitude and they don't have support, they may well see their body as quite dirty and unclean and horrible at this time. So there's quite a lot to unpick around how we relate to our blood. Modern societies wearing tampons, hiding it away, pretending it doesn't exist. But now in modern cultures, many women use the moon cup, and a plastic cup which they can put inside their vagina, which collects the blood, and then give the blood to their plants, or see it in a more sacred kind of way. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments on how you relate to your bleeding, what do you do with your blood, and so on. So what exactly are we releasing? I did a little research on this because I wanted to make sure that I gave you the correct figures, and it generally seems to be agreed that we lose between about 30 to 50 millilitres of blood. But blood makes up only about, again the figures seem to vary, 36 to 48% of what we actually lose, because we're not just losing blood, we're clearing out the lining of the womb. So it's the endometrium, the lining of the womb, which has built up during the whole of our period. It starts about 1 to 2 millimeters thick. Even with these figures, there's variation, and it ends up being about 7 to 9 millimeters thick at its thickest. And so all of this is cleared out. So blood is part of that, but there's also the cell lining of the womb. And that's what's considered normal, this 30 to 50 millilitres. So if you have to at least double that to get the total amount of what we're losing, so that's more like 60 to 100. But then there's also a question mark on how much is considered heavy blood loss. So some people say 80 millilitres, some say 120, and that's just the blood. So you've got to at least double that. But as a woman, it's how do we know how much we are actually losing unless we use something like a moon cup, a plastic cup which collects the blood? It's a bit difficult to see. They tend to say heavy blood loss is more than 12 pads or tampons during a whole period. But I remember when I was in my 20s and I had heavy bleeding, sometimes I'd be changing pads every hour or so. I initially went to the doctor when I was in my teens, and they wanted to put me on the pill, like many young teenagers get prescribed. For some reason, I didn't feel very comfortable with that, and I just put up with it. But the amount of blood loss now, I realise, I would have been told to go and see a medical doctor and have more tests done to see what was going on. So I think there's quite a lot of unclarity and confusion on something so fundamental as how much we bleed each month and what exactly we lose and what is considered normal. And I would really welcome your thoughts and feedback and comments on this. It's a really interesting subject. So heavy blood loss, I mean, we often are told heavy blood loss that can cause anemia, but you have to lose quite a lot of blood to be anemic, so that's also quite interesting. I mean, the reason that we are often told to go and see a doctor if we have heavy blood loss, which, as I said, is normally defined about 12 tampons or pads during a period, but also it's regularly losing that amount of blood. Once or twice or occasionally a heavier period is part of the natural variation within the cycle. But when every month we lose a heavy amount of blood and we're tired and we're worn out through the whole month, then clearly that is of more concern, and especially if we suffer a lot, if we have a lot of pain, because it can be a sign in extreme cases of cancer of the womb. It can be a sign of blood clotting disorders. It can be a sign of hormonal imbalance. So there can be things going on. It can be a sign of polycystic ovaries. It can be a sign of endometriosis. So it gets a bit more complicated. I think, though, that looking at the medical and figures and everything like that, we can lose sight of the emotional aspect. A shock, an extreme shock, can either stop us bleeding or make us bleed more. So we have to look at the whole picture of a woman's life to see whether her blood loss is heavy for her or normal, and how she manages it. For Chinese medicine, we can say that heavy blood loss, it's quite interesting. It could either be that the energy is weak, and so the body can't hold the blood in, or the blood, I'm talking about blood in inverted commas. Blood in Chinese medicine is blood that flows in our blood cells, so blood that we normally think of as blood, but it's a whole energy of nourishment. So it's more than blood. So in Chinese medicine, we can say it could be a weakness, that our body can't hold the blood in, and so it just floods out. But it can also be a blockage of blood, and then it all suddenly releases. So the heaviness could be caused by a blockage which is freed, and then you get a heavy blood loss. So that's one whole aspect of blood. The other is that some women have very light blood loss, very little blood loss, and sometimes not any blood loss at all. I haven't in these series so far talked about the effects of contraception on the cycle, but some forms of contraception actually suppress ovulation. And so if there's no ovulation, then you don't get the corpus luteum, you don't release an egg, so therefore you don't have the corpus luteum. And so the blood loss when a woman is on certain types of hormonal contraception, which could be oral or intrauterine devices, mean that the bleeding pattern is quite different. It's much lighter. It's not caused by all the physiological changes that I've been talking about. But in a natural menstrual cycle, sometimes little or very low blood loss can be a sign of hormonal imbalance or lack of weight or shock emotions. And many women experience, or we all know of women who have experienced sometimes in their lives when they have had very light or non-existent periods. Of course, it could be a sign of anorexia. In Chinese medicine, light periods is more a sign of weakness rather than blockage in the pelvis. So there is a certain amount, it's quite a wide range of variation between the amount of blood and lining that each woman loses each month, but also the duration is another factor. Some women have very short, heavy periods, 2 or 3 days. The average length of menstruation is about 4 to 5 days. Other women have longer periods, so heavy bleeding over a longer period of time. Obviously, we are going to lose more blood, and that can be more depleting. Now I want to spend a little bit of time giving you a few tools and reflections on it related to my understanding of Chinese medicine. I've already talked a little bit about this, the Girdle Vessel, which is a powerful vessel which I have some more videos on if you want to explore a bit more, and I'm going to give you a few exercises for this vessel. And also what we're letting go of is blood. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the next video, because we're in the opening out of our blood, we open and release another vessel, which is called the penetrating vessel, and we need to build that up. But if you consider, if you're opening up, I talked about how you might be very sensitive, then after bleeding, we need to gather back in. So that will be in the next phase. Now I want to focus on what we can do to support fully releasing. But in order to fully release, we need to feel, often we really need to feel safe, and that's why the red tent movement can be quite helpful. We don't have to be with other women, we may just want to be on our own in a safe space. A bit like with birth. Some women want to give birth on their own, and other women want to have support around them. So I hope I've given you a little bit of an understanding of some of the themes of this phase. And I've created, before we go into the exercises, a couple of affirmations. I accept the death of my creation and release its energies so I can begin anew. And another affirmation is, I open to the transformation and purification of my energies. So we'll now finish this video with a few minutes of just some simple movements in working with the girdle vessel, so that you can get the gift of this cycle, experience it more fully, which is the gift of releasing, and so that we can transform. Here are a few simple exercises to help you with releasing. So this black cloth is to give you a bit of an idea of what the girdle vessel, this powerful vessel of Chinese medicine that helps to support releasing. It's the girdle vessel that opens up for bleeding, and it actually goes all the way around. So this is the area that we're focusing on releasing. Really, it's our whole pelvic area around. So simple movement, put your hands on your hips, and you can feel the front part of the hip bone. Sorry, I'll just come down and show you that again. Hands on your hips, so this front part here, I want you to put your fingers here, and you can hold onto both sides. And just stand, find a comfortable position, maybe feet about hip width apart. And just breathe, softening your shoulders, bringing your awareness to your pelvic area. And then slowly you can just make a figure of 8 on its side, with the center of the figure of 8 really around your navel. This is actually known as the lemniscat, or the infinity symbol. So just following this figure of 8, you can change the direction, and that can give a nice way of releasing. Even dancing, just simply dancing, but really focus on moving this whole area. Some people feel even that belly dancing was created to help support women's health. So this is one movement you can do. But you might want to involve your arms and have more of a swinging movement. So here, just swing, and sometimes even breathing out a little bit more deeply. And just releasing physically, but also any emotions, anything that no longer serves you, just let it go. Softening your jaw, softening your shoulders. That will all help more release in the pelvis. If we hold our jaw and we hold our shoulders, we're creating tension within our pelvis. So you can play around with standing movements when you're waiting at the bus stop for the tube or something like that. Just do little movements, even more shaking if that feels what you want to do. But another of my favourite movements is actually you can just sit on a ball and do some similar movements as well. But one of my favourites is leaning on a ball, just a normal plastic gym ball, but I do find it's usually nicer to cover it with something. I got into ball work when teaching partners positions for birth, but releasing during menstruation is a bit like a mini birth. So you can just lean on the ball and circle, relax. You could go forwards and backwards. You could even bring up a leg, put your foot on the ground and just play around with rocking forwards and backwards and circling and moving, and obviously do both sides. You can be a bit more upright, or you can simply just rest. If you're feeling tired, come down and just rest over the ball and let it gently rock you. So, thank you for sharing this time with me, and I hope you have some ideas of releasing and transforming, ready for a new cycle.